refugees and hiring thousands more border police and customs agents. Live now to our Washington correspondent, Kylie Morris. Kylie.
John, amid this blitzkrieg of first-week executive orders today, the focus has turned to immigration, which was really much anticipated given the significance attached to the issue by Trump, the candidate, and those millions of Americans who voted for him. Trump, the president, has signed an executive order that we're told includes a diktat finally to build the wall. The president has given an interview to say that he expects construction to start within months and that planning is already underway. And as you say, he's reiterated that Mexico will pay for it, or at least reimburse whatever the US spends constructing it. Critics say that this is political theatre and simply won't achieve its aims. But the White House calls it a common sense first step to stem the flow of drugs, crime and illegal immigration. We are also expecting in the next days another order to ban temporarily refugees from a number of Muslim majority states, so a reversioning of the Muslim ban. President Trump has all the optics to say he's delivering on those big campaign promises. He's also ordered an investigation into his belief, absent of evidence, that between 3 and 5 million votes were fraudulently cast on Election Day. That, though, feels like a distraction from what is actually happening.
On day one, we will begin working on an impenetrable, physical, tall, powerful, beautiful southern border wall.
Not day one, but week one, and the president is signing his wall into life with an executive action. There's little hard detail, but Donald Trump plans to deliver for his supporters the semblance of action on a key campaign promise to stem illegal immigration by securing America's southern border with Mexico. And who's going to pay for it?
Ultimately, it'll come out of what's happening with Mexico. We're going to be starting those negotiations relatively soon, and we will be, in a form, reimbursed by Mexico.
Mexico's president said in recent days that Mexico absolutely will not pay, adding that it goes against our dignity as a country and our dignity as Mexicans. He says, quite simply, they're not paying.
David, I think he has to say that. He has to say that.
The gargantuan project the president envisages, estimated by the government to cost $12 billion, gives physical scale to his hard-line immigration ideology.
Any wall or any block on a border doesn't prevent people from coming. All it means is that it's going to push people farther out into the desert, and it means more people are going to die.
Undeterred, the president is working his way through the greatest hits of his campaign with his executive order program. Next on the list, remember this.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
That plan itself won't come to pass, but something similar is in the works. Most likely a temporary ban on resettling in the US refugees from a number of Muslim-majority countries, and the overall number of refugees taken in by the world's richest country will be reduced by more than half. As it stands, from October 2015 to September last year, under the Obama administration, the US admitted just shy of 85,000 refugees. Of those, 12,500 were from Syria, almost 10,000 from Iraq, and 3,750 from Iran. Nearly 40,000 of those resettled over that period are Muslim. And they will be the focus of the presidential order.
It's criminalizing an entire population based on their faith. And this goes against our Constitution and goes against our values. He's focusing specifically on Muslim-majority countries, and he's focusing on people's nationalities, and this is very un-American and very unconstitutional.
For refugees and migrants from Muslim countries, from Central and South American nations, Fortress America is under construction and no longer open to the huddled masses. On the southern border, there'll be more detention centres and more punitive action against those who try to cross. Any cities that try to resist the immigration crackdown, known here as sanctuary cities, will lose their federal funding.
Kylie Morris reporting from Washington. Well, we're joined now from that city by Zainab Chowdhury from the Council of American Islamic Relations and by Star Parker, a conservative columnist and founder of the Center of Urban Renewal. She's also in D.C. Zainab Chowdhury, these are 7 countries from which, of course, quite a number of war refugees might come into America. What do you make of this first executive order?
You know, we're deeply disturbed. Any kind of policy or executive order that unfairly discriminates or targets against any population, specifically based on religion or race or ethnicity or sexual orientation or what have you, is deeply antithetical to the values of our country. And not only that, but it also pits the Muslim world against the Western world, against the United States. It sends a message to the Muslim world that you are not, you're not welcome here. And I think especially in these countries that were targeted, the fact that many of these countries are seeing some of the worst humanitarian crises of our times is especially disturbing, because now we've essentially told them, or will be telling them, our government will be telling them that they're not welcome here.
Well, now, Star Parker, isn't there a danger that this may deepen divisions in America rather than heal them?
Well, perhaps, but what we hear is that most of the people in that region don't like Americans anyway. It's sort of like having a guest come into your home. They have to abide by the rules of your home. What Americans, I believe, are waiting for is a loud voice out of that region that actually says that something has gone terribly wrong. Why are they refugees in the first place? And instead, what we get is scrutiny of Israel, which most Americans believe is our dear friend.
Well, when one thinks of
I don't know
America,
where you're getting that information from. The idea.
Sorry, keep going. Yes, keep going.
No, I was just going to say the idea that many of the people in those countries don't like America, or they don't appreciate Western values. I'm not sure where that information is coming from. It's entirely subjective. I mean, I think that we also have to examine our own foreign policies and the fact that we've also invaded many of these countries, and we've also conducted drone strikes and indiscriminate drone strikes in many of these countries. I think that it's important to look at the data and the facts that we have. And the reality is that refugees and immigrants do not pose a threat to national security. The vast majority of reports indicate that refugees are. But
listen to the double talk in what you're saying right there. First, you're saying that we have attacked them, but now they want in this country and they're going to abide by our laws and our rules. I think Americans are saying, let's just pause. Let's pause because we're not sure. Keep in mind that the men that attacked us on September 11th, 9/11, were men that had dwelled with us for years. I think that Americans are tolerant enough. And what's happening now is we're hearing that you're too impatient.
Which, mind you, by the way, the country that many of those perpetrators were from Saudi Arabia. Many of those perpetrators were from Saudi Arabia.
Yes,
which,
that is
mind you, is not one
absolutely
of the
true. Why can't we focus policy on?
I think it's important. I think it's important to keep perspective. American Muslims suffered as much as Americans of diverse faiths on 9/11, and to use that as an excuse to push back against religious pluralism, to push back against some of the values and principles that are enshrined in our Constitution.
Let me just, can I just come in there? I just want to come in for a moment. Let me put it to you, Star Parker, that the worst atrocities ever committed on the American mainland were committed indeed by 15 Saudi terrorists. Saudi Arabia is not to be listed in this list of people that are going to be watched.
Right. Now, I don't think it's about which country hit us.
I just wanted to add a further thing to the question. The question, Star Parker, is that this is a country which is spreading Wahhabism across and radicalizing much of the immediate world around Pakistan and Bangladesh, and indeed in Afghanistan. Are they not a threat to America?
Well, what we know is that when Americans' friends are under attack at the UN, everybody that thinks that we should do something about that region channels their energy toward all of the others that are in disagreement with America. What Americans are now saying is we have a president who's saying, let's pause. Let's find out what is really broken down in that region and why people, especially the refugees, can't live in their own country. These are the problems we should solve, not try to integrate them into American culture, because America does have a defined culture.
Okay, Zainab Chaudhry.
Let's call a spade a spade. This executive order isn't about national security. It's not about protecting Americans. The vast majority of threats that are waged towards Americans are domestic in nature, and that's backed up by data and by evidence and by reports. This is about Islamophobia. This is about anti-Muslim bigotry, and the idea that we're perpetuating more animosity, we're perpetuating a us versus them dichotomy by these kind of policies and these kind of executive orders that are going to further alienate a segment of the world's population that can be one of the greatest allies in securing our nation and our interests abroad is really, I think, something that is...
Let's just just say what you said is true. Let's just say that.
And refugees, over 800,000 refugees have entered the United States since 2001. And of those, the vast majority of these are law-abiding citizens.
Just pause a moment. Let's hear from Star Parker.
Let's just say that it is true that our major threats are domestic. Let's just pretend that what you just said is true. Then that's all the more reason we should shut down and begin to process what is already in our country and try to find out who we are as a free country, and then we will open it up to our guests. What refugees are guests in our country.
Can you name one terrorist attack in your home? Can you name one terrorist attack that took place in the United States?
It's not about terrorism at this point. It's about.
Can you name one attack that was launched by refugees that entered the United States?
I'm sorry, it's very, very hard to do it all at once.
Contribute.
I think we've got the sense of what each of you stands for. Thank you very much indeed, Zainab Chowdhury, and thank you very much, Star Parker. I'm afraid I'm still talking as you are, but thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks, John. American president in Twitter war with national parks after public spat over size of inauguration crowd. It sounds like a headline from Private Eye. But like so much else in the world, according to Trump, it's true, or fact, not even alternative fact. But America's national parks have a mind of their own, and it seems the appropriately named Badlands in South Dakota have gone rogue. #Sadlands, as Donald Trump might say, or tweet. Here's our science editor, Tom Clark.
Badlands National Park, home to wild bison, rare fossils, striking scenery, and briefly, facts about climate change.
Burning 1 gallon of gasoline puts nearly 20 pounds of carbon dioxide into our atmosphere. The pre-industrial concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was 280 parts per million. As of December 2016, 404.93 parts per million.
They were almost immediately taken down. But why, if they were factually correct? After moves this week by the Trump administration to silence federal agencies that deal with climate change, the tweets were seen as a deliberate act of defiance. The Park Service, a federal body itself, promptly apologised. But the episode speaks of a new mood hanging in the air.
The relentless resistance to Trump's regressive policies start today and will continue for the next 4 years.
They're worried about things like the money that pays for toxic waste cleanups like this spill on the Colorado River. The transition team at the Environmental Protection Agency has announced a temporary freeze on all contracts, grants and public statements. It says they're part of a normal transition. But former EPA officials we've spoken to say this has not happened previously and indicate new protections in the pipeline may now not happen. What's worried others are gagging orders, again temporary, on officials and scientists within environmental agencies.
I just want to make sure that all of those federal employees who have anything that they want to say to Congress, because there's some confusion now as to whether they can talk to us. I'm telling you, the law protects you, and I will do every single thing in my power to make sure you're protected. Call me. I want to talk to you.
The speed at which orders are flying out of the White House has left environmentalists in a state of panic. How justified, we just don't know yet. But the orders issued so far, from oil pipelines to the efficiency of boilers, are nearly an exact match for the lobbying wish list of the fossil fuel industry. They've been kept out of the White House for 8 years. Now they're back.
Tom Clark reporting. Now, all this week, we have a number of special reports from some of the world's most pressing hotspots, places which are searing their way onto President Trump's immediate agenda. Tonight, the battle for Mosul. French cameraman Olivier Sarabil spent 6 weeks with an elite unit of the Iraqi Special Forces as they struggled to recapture the city that fell to IS, also known as Daesh, 2.5 years ago. More than 100 days into the battle for Mosul, the alliance of Iraqi, Kurdish and Shiite Muslim forces, backed by US-led air and ground support, have met stiff resistance. Yesterday, Iraq's Prime Minister said his forces were now in full control of eastern Mosul. In their crosshairs, just across the Tigris, lies the infamous Al-Nuri Mosque, where Daesh leader Bakr al-Baghdadi first declared the so-called global caliphate. Andy Davis has tonight's special report, the first in our series from Trump's World.
This is a story about the people of Mosul and the slow grinding battle to free them from Islamic State. They are the overnight refugees, quietly fleeing the war and the 2.5 years endured under rule by caliphate. Now wondering what comes next. And these are their Iraqi army liberators, the erstwhile children of Saddam's Iraq, now in the vanguard of the battle to save Iraq. The army which once fled from Mosul is back, this time with its elite special forces, trained by the West, here since October, going from house to house, and always with the same question.
افتح الباب. افتح الباب. جيش عراقي جيش عراقي. الله محييكم. لا تخافين يما لا تخافين ماكو شيء. لا فيكم احنا. صعدوا على السطح. وين ما تروحوا روحوا اخواني انتم. تعالوا على السطح. حتى الولد فوق البنزين.
Is this shocked relief that the jihadi fighters have finally gone, or the fear of a Sunni confronted by largely Shia soldiers?
كانوا هنا يمكن داعش؟ كانوا بالمنطقة داعش؟ داعش
لا ما موجودين، ما بيضربوني ويمشون.
الحمد لله على سلامتك.
الله يسلمك.
احنا اخواتكم واهلكم مو غرب.
الله يفتح.
الحمد لله والشكر. لا تخافون عمي لا تخافون. لا تخافون.
It is the gentlest of exchanges, but in their midst, an army accused in the past of countless sectarian crimes.
زين هسه يعني زين ما عندي موس كل شيء هذا موس ولا مكفي. طب جوا طب جوا طب جوا واللحايه زينوها حجي. ما يصير احنا ما نقبلها. واللحايه والله على الواسع مكان اي عوف الفراش دروعتهم كلها حتى انت البس درعك. هسه انا شنو فرقي عنك؟ ليش انا لابس درعي وانت نازع درعك؟ يعني والله ما يدري يعني هسه انا وين كنت قابل؟ اجيت تستوي من المطعم. ما دخلنا عن سيدي طالب الواجب لو لا. عارفين؟ قتلته؟ ورا الباب. بس مو هنا مو على الشارع.
For the unit's snipers, identifying insurgents from civilians poses a constant challenge.
أول لا هذول. العباد دواء. ويا ما عندي مسلح هذاك واحد شو ما عنده سلاح. مو عوائل؟ عوائل. ايش تسوي له؟ هذا عائل. اي شاب قاعد ابغى انا هسه.
A woman approaches the soldiers, but the fear of suicide bombers is ever present, so they fire a warning shot.
اقعد اشرف الله يعافيك انهي اشرف على راسنا على راسنا واحنا جايين على موتكم هسه راح نضل هنا بالشارع لا هسه راح ينزلكم كويس.
Eventually she persuades the soldiers to let her and her family in without any checks. And once inside, there is one thing above all else she yearns to know.
انتم ما دولة اسلامية ما كل الرشدي هذول والله خاف نحكي يضربونا بالله يقتلونا.
راحت الدولة ولا
انت من الصبح من الساعة 6 على راقبكم حتى قال لي رشدي قلت له يابا ما عندهم لحاية قال لي لا.
If she is overwhelmed by this news, Naif, a staff sergeant in this unit, appears slightly overwhelmed by her.
كل شيء ما هذولات يمنا روح قدم المناطق كلها السوق مفتوح الحياة طبيعية كل شيء ماكو لا دولة مقدرة ولا هم يحزنون.
As the reality kicks in, it all becomes too much. Taken to a room for first aid. Here is Mariam, veil removed. And as they leave over a neighbour's wall, the husband curses the self-declared leader of Islamic State, al-Baghdadi.
حبيبي متشغلين متشغلين حبيبي
And this is what his work looks like. ISIS fighters are a matter of meters away up that street. They hotwire a car. They think a suicide bomber could be coming. Clutch screeching, the white Toyota is taken down the road. For all the high-tech armoury, this is how you defend against suicide bombers. Here, one of the unit has come to help a wounded civilian in one of Mosul's ubiquitous sniper alleys. All are in danger. Shia soldier helping Sunni civilian, or just one Iraqi helping another.
ما عندي غيرك يعني والله ما عندي غيرك أنت الوحيدة اللي هتخلي ببالك والله صانع غبي واصبر.
While Lieutenant Wamir whispers sweet nothings, outside as night falls in Mosul, others keep watch. This is also the time when Islamic State Radio, Radio Dula, likes to broadcast chat shows. This one advertising tomorrow's suicide bombing.
ساعات أبو عمارة في هذه الحياة الدنيا الفانية قد باتت معدودة. يحاول أن يستغل تلك الساعات بتعليم إخوانه لكتاب الله. إخوانه الذين يسيرون على دربه. ولكنه اليوم يحمل هم أمة إسلامية بأكملها. يحمل هما لا تحمله الجبال الشاهقات. كان أبو عمارة عندما يشاهد ما قمنا بتصويره يبتسم ويقول هل سأشاهد الإصدار وأنا في الجنة؟
And then it begins.
جهة اليمين يمين المدرسة من فوق السطح دا يرمي من فوق السطح دا يصير رماية. تي 40 ما عنده غير 300 تطلع هسه حاليا بس 300. سيدي صحيح وانا عندي 400 هسه ما رمينا غير 100 الرماية كانت كلها على البيت.
صارت رماية من هالبيت وهالبيت المناطق من هنا.
هاي مناطق العماية؟
صحيح رئيس.
For those suspected of fighting under the IS banner and the brutalities it brings, justice can be fast and at times rough. Some of these men were ultimately released, the fate of others unclear. But how to detect a jihadist in your midst? One clue, check for a recent trip to the barbers.
شعره سوام زين ابوه هذا زيان جديد. لا مقرطف والله ما يا سوكم زين يا ارضه. هذا الولد هسه جيب لك اياه. زين خر عليك. دقيقه صار لك بسجن 5 اشهر. والله والله دمروني والله وحرموني من اهلي والله زين هاي الفلوس منين جبت؟
والله ملاكي هو انت كنت تحطهم على
هذا الورقه بجيبه 5 اوراق ومنها 20 متسلسل 3 جنازه.
US dollars and multiple IDs, often hallmarks here of Islamic State.
والله ما حد شيء سيدي والله ما عندي شيء والله بطلوا الدواعش والله
التليفون مالته ما فارغ تليفونه فارغ كل شيء لا رسائل لا مكالمات لا دنيا ما اصحى.
He was later handed over to their commanders. What happened next, we don't know. As they edge deeper into Mosul and another street is taken, the soldiers relax.
شوف البراءة شوف الحزن بين على وجهه شوف.
Locals offer tea to the soldiers. Moments of civility in a city emerging from the horrors of Islamic State rule.
تسمى جايين حجة الإسلام كان يجينا شيء موبايل يخبر إعلام.
يعني ما فتم احنا ما يعني حتى خفت رفعناكم عملنا ان شاء الله بجهودكم ان شاء الله.
Here a glimpse of a new future for Iraq, perhaps. But these are fleeting moments. In this enduring struggle, there is a constant threat, such as the father boasting on Radio Dula of having persuaded a son to become suicide bomber.
أنا شجعت على عملية الشهادية قلت لك إنه هي الطريق للجنة. هو غسيل دماء يتكلم عليه هو فعلا غسيل دماء بس بإيش؟ بالكتاب والسنة. توجه رسالة إلى الآباء القاعدين على الجهاد. الله نصيحة لهم أول شيء اتقوا الله في أنفسهم. وأخوته كمان إن شاء الله يسيروا نفس الطريق بإذن الله.
Next we hear from the bomber, from the sound of his voice, just a child.
إلى الآن قاعدين على الجهاد. صيتك لهم يشوفوك قاعدين على الجهاد اللي
نسأل الله رب العرش العظيم أن يهديهم. والله يتوبوا إلى الله عز وجل وذهبوا إلى الجهاد.
Then this from the soldiers.
تعال يا خلينا نلحقهم يا معواد.
And, as if on cue, for weeks ISIS had been an almost spectral presence. Now it is anything but. A suicide bomber has destroyed the unit's Humvee. It was empty this time. Since filming, this unit has suffered several casualties. The battle for Mosul continues.
And that special report was filmed by Olivier Sarabel, directed by Teresa Smith and edited by Aggie Liggett. Matt.
First the High Court, then the Supreme Court, and now a white paper setting out in detail the government's actual negotiation plans over the how and the when of Brexit. Theresa May wanted none of it, but she's been forced into the latest concession after some Conservative MPs joined opposition calls for a formal document making the process clear. Labour said it should be published before MPs vote on triggering Article 50 ahead of the government's March deadline. Our political correspondent, Michael Crick, has this report.
Overnight, government sources had been dismissing the idea of a white paper, and the Daily Mail today even wrote of a white paper plot by Tory rebels to force a U-turn. But when Theresa May came to question time, a helpful question from a friendly Conservative enabled her now to join the plot.
I set out that bold plan for a global Britain last week, and I recognise there is an appetite in this House to see that plan set out in a white paper. My honourable friend's question, the question from my honourable friend, the member from Broxtowe, last week, in the same vein, and I can confirm to the House that our plan will be set out in a white paper published in this House.
Some opposition leaders would have pounced and mocked this climb down. But Mr Corbyn wasn't quick enough to drop his scripted question about yesterday's court judgment.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has wasted 80 days between the time of the original judgment and the appeal, and has now finally admitted today, after pressure from all sides, that there's going to be a white paper. Could we know when this white paper is going to be available to us? And why it's taken so long to get it?
She wouldn't give a date, but the former SNP leader says publication must be before MPs vote, which is likely in the next 2 weeks.
You'd expect to see demonstrated in the white paper they've done some thinking about where they're leading the country or attempting to lead the country. And if they don't publish it before the parliamentary votes, then the obvious question is, what are they frightened of? What are they trying to hide? So we say, white paper, they've conceded that because the arithmetic didn't look good for them in the Commons. So let's have the white paper before the parliamentary vote so people actually this time know what they're voting on.
After the court ruling, Labour threatened hand-to-hand combat on the Article 50 bill and still have plenty of other amendments to propose.
Well, we haven't seen the bill yet, but we want amendments about the need for the government to report back to Parliament. Yesterday, the Supreme Court said that Parliament is sovereign. That's going to be meaningful. And we want to put down amendments dealing with the vote on the final deal. The Prime Minister has said there will be a vote on the final deal. It's very important that's a meaningful vote.
In effect, the government has a Commons majority of about 30 right now. That's if one includes the normally supportive Democratic Unionists from Ulster. And the whole question of publishing a white paper on Brexit was the one area where the government looked most likely to lose. But a white paper doesn't actually have to be that substantial. Some white papers are just a few pages. So all Downing Street needs to do is rejig Theresa May's speech from last week and perhaps top and tail it. Michael Crick, Channel 4 News, Westminster.
Now, it was one of the issues which overshadowed the US elections, the hacking of the Democratic National Committee and the subsequent CIA investigation. The furore which surrounded it severely dented Hillary Clinton's campaign. Some say it frustrated her chances altogether. Now, Channel 4 News has learned that the same Russian group behind that cyber attack has also been hitting targets right here in the United Kingdom, according to security researchers. Jeff White has this report.
So help me God.
It was the hack that helped change the course of history. Clinton campaign emails were leaked, US intelligence agencies blamed the Russian government. Meanwhile, Trump took the White House. Think the UK was unaffected? Think again. According to security researchers, the same hackers who hit the Democrats also broke into a UK television station. For almost a year, from July 2015, they could snoop on just about everyone.
They're able to essentially see all communications coming in and out of that organisation, whether that's internal communications, whether it's communications about the TV station as a business, or indeed any stories coming in or being communicated about by the journalists.
For legal reasons, the techies who cleaned up the hack can't name the channel, so neither can we. But they, like other security companies, believe the hacking group is a branch of the Russian government, and they're linking that group with the US political attacks and now this British victim. Here's how.
We believe it's Russia that targeted the DNC. The other targets, the other victims of that same campaign included military attachés, political figures, journalists with interest in Ukraine, and that fits exactly into Russians' interests. So that same tactic used against the DNC to initially gain access. Once they've gained access, they used a computer virus to maintain that access, to have the back door. That same backdoor was used against this UK TV station.
That backdoor software is unique to this group, researchers say. They built it and they control it. they've targeted TV stations before. In April 2015, France's TV5 Monde was hacked. It almost killed the business.
For more than 8 hours, we were totally off air with our 12 channels. That's a big problem because the first thing that you guarantee the satellite and the cable companies is that you always are going to send them a signal. So we could have lost all our broadcasting capacity throughout the world, which would have obviously killed the company. It's cost us 9 million euros in 2015 and 2016.
Initially blamed on Islamic State hackers, it was later pinned on the same Russian group. Unlike TV5 Monde, the British TV station wasn't taken off air by the hackers. It's believed they may have been a test run for a potential future attack. But we've learned they aren't the only British organisation to be targeted by this shadowy hacker group, known to many as Fancy Bears. Data we've been given shows the scale of their operation. They sent around 5,000 spam emails to trick victims into handing over passwords. The UK was third highest on their list. More than 170 people clicked on the links using computers with UK addresses. High-tech tactics, but a traditional political game, say security experts.
It's fairly clear that the Russians are engaged in a sustained propaganda campaign. Clearly they've been active in the US, but they are active in Europe and they have various targets. So one shouldn't be surprised, I think, that they would be interested in media outlets.
A spokesperson for the Russian embassy in London told us,
"Without any details and proof, we cannot make a judgment on this allegation. The quality of proof produced in the notorious US intelligence report leads one to conclude that no trustworthy evidence exists so far. It is a murky business, a sort of free-for-all in terms of politicisation, and seems to be used as a means of keeping afloat Cold War politics."
Murky indeed. But whereas the Cold War was waged in the shadows, today's information battles are fought in the glare of cyberspace.
Well, America's financial markets are certainly on a high about Donald Trump and what his economic policies could bring, especially the banks. The Dow Jones Industrial Average has been trading above the 20,000 mark for the first time in its history. The president's advisor swiftly claiming it was down to the Trump effect. Our business correspondent Helia Ebrahimi is here. Let's start with the sugar high. Why?
Well, like everything American, when they do it big. So call it Trump inflation, call it the Trump effect. This ascent to 20,000 is a real historic milestone, not just for US markets, but for global markets. Since his election, the index has soared almost 10%. That means that more than $500 billion has been added to the value of shares. And just to give you some context, that's the equivalent of the entire Swedish economy. And in true style, President Trump took to Twitter to celebrate. But the reasons behind this market fears are, first, this expectation you're going to have a huge stimulus package in the form of infrastructure. That's why you have firms like Caterpillar, they make diggers, seeing their share price rise up 40%. Then this idea there'll be a wave of tax cuts. And third, this boast from President Trump that you're going to have a bonfire of regulations. And this is most keenly seen in bank stocks, which have been on a tear. Now, a cynic might say, isn't it a pretty coincidence that 3 of President Trump's most senior colleagues are former Goldman Sachs executives? And this is all about a rule called the Volcker Rule, brought in after Lehman to stop banks trading on their own account. This could be repealed, and the #1 beneficiary, well, it would be Goldman Sachs.
So much for the sugar high. What about the sugar low? Is that inevitable?
Well, look, I think traders and hedge funds are all making money now, but economists are more concerned about the possibility of trade wars and the rising dollar. The irony of Trump inflation is as the dollar goes up, foreign labour, foreign imports becomes more and more attractive to American consumers and companies. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve becomes more and more tempted to hike interest rates, which could pour water on Trump's huge economic boom.
Huge. Helia, thanks very much. John.
From Argos security guard to President of Gambia, Adama Barrow's unlikely journey finally reaches its rightful destination tomorrow, when he's due to arrive home, a week after he was sworn into power in a tiny embassy office in neighbouring Senegal. The former leader, Yahya Jammeh, had to be crowbarred out of the country over the weekend after bowing to international pressure. He had lost the election, but couldn't quite bring himself to relinquish power. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, has more.
Into exile at the weekend, Yahya Jammeh. The night, time ran out for Gambia's dictator for 22 years, not the billion he'd once boasted of. With him, the family entourage, bodyguards, and it's said $11 million, and a fleet of Rolls-Royce, Bentley and Mercedes cars. Right to the end, though, any opposition was potentially life-threatening. Take T-shirt maker Tijan Barrow, who shares his name with the new elected president. He'd been printing the slogan, Gambia has decided, and paid the price.
Before we reached Banjul, they were torturing me inside the vehicle, hitting me with their guns. And one of them said, "What's your name?" Told him Tijan. Said, "Your surname?" Said Barrow. Say, "Your surname will not favor you. You will spend your life in jail. We will kill you and Barrow, and you will print these T-shirts in hell."
Not so. Invaded by foreign soldiers in the capital, they're delighted about that. Cheering greeted 4,000 West African peacekeepers who swept into Banjul after the dictator fled to Equatorial Guinea.
These are all signs of unity. When your brother is in crisis, you intervene and help, give help. These are all signs, these are all unity.
This is a time for change. We don't need dictatorship anymore. We need democracy, and through of that, there is development.
I am very happy, like we have a new president. Yeah, that is, come on, that is a big joy.
And so they are free at last to tear down the images of another fallen African dictator. In the capital, Banjul, they wait. The gunners prepare for the gunner. Arsenal fan, property developer and former North London security guard Adama Barrow.
I, Adama Barrow.
Sworn in a week ago in neighbouring Senegal. With security returning, the election winner is duly coming home tomorrow evening and telling all Gambians who fled the terror to come home too and build a new country.
Alex Thompson. After the break, no home but the streets. The number of people sleeping rough has soared since last year. We're out on the freezing streets of Manchester, hearing from some of them. In the frost of winter, the streets may look alluring in the early morning, but just imagine sleeping out there. There's been a sharp rise in the number of people sleeping rough. In fact, now twice as many homeless people are on the streets than 6 years ago. Latest official figures from a snapshot night in autumn 2016 show there was a total of 4,134 rough sleepers. That's an increase of 16% on the year before. London remains the place with most rough sleepers, 23% of the total. But the numbers show that the problem is actually growing fastest outside the capital. The numbers of rough sleepers in London was up 3% on the previous year, but in the rest of England, it jumped by 21%. From Manchester, here's Simeon Brown.
A night out in the centre of Manchester is something most look forward to, but nightlife means something completely different to these 30-somethings.
I'll show you where I'm stopping tonight.
John is 34, an age where most begin to think about where they can buy a place. John's ambitions are to find a doorway where he's not going to get peed on or attacked.
What determines if you consider an area to be safe or not?
Areas, safe areas, is where we see like cameras, like CCTV, like on the street, or if they're like pointing to the front of the shop, and then we like normally pitch up there because there's like always security onto us. So safe spots, bad spots are bad.
And if it's not a safe spot, what kind of thing can happen to you?
Well, you can get kicked, you can get spat on, you can get peed on, everything.
But there's not much safety on the streets. But there are new faces to go over today's new figures, revealing that homelessness has risen by 16% since last year, and by over 100% since 2010. Manchester has one of the highest populations of rough sleepers in the country, which makes John's quest for a safe place to rest his head even harder. But first stop for him is a car boot soup kitchen, where we met Anne-Marie, who knows what life is like on these streets for a woman.
It toughened me up a bit, but I didn't need the lesson.
After a long period homeless, she now has her own place, but now feels lonely and comes back to see her friends.
Do you imagine that many of your friends won't survive this winter?
A few of them haven't.
What do you mean?
A few of them have passed away last year, some this year, and some of them are in shelters. They end up on the drink to keep warm, and then he goes to drugs. But I've been lucky, no drugs, too scared. I've seen what it does. But yeah, that's how it happens. Death, divorce, depression.
The soup kitchen is open a few hours a day. When it closes, John and his friends get back on their way. And one even had some fortune.
I'm glad that I've got actual people who are helping me get on the sofas, because probably tomorrow, probably Deansgate, down here, probably around town, Piccadilly, anywhere safe, as long as I don't get touched or whatever else. I've got to keep myself safe.
Sofa surfers are often the hidden homeless. Counting the full number of rough sleepers is already hard enough. Just 1 in 7 local authorities actually do this. The rest estimate, which means there may be many more out there like John and his friends. Tonight, this is where they're pitching up.
It's quiet, and you've got all them there as well, like looking out on us, cameras.
So this is what good night from John looks like. A bed made up on pavement opposite luxury flats.
Simeon Brown reporting, but we're now joined by the head of the homeless charity Crisis, John Sparks, and in Manchester, the Labour MP Andy Burnham, who's also Labour's candidate to become the city's next mayor. Welcome to you both. Let me start with you, John Sparks. I mean, you heard that report there by Simeon. Why do you think the problem is so bad and getting so much worse, and what should be done about it?
Well, let's start. The figures are appalling. 4,000 people sleeping rough. This is. But
dangerous. Also the rate of increase.
Yeah, the rate of increase as well. And below the statistics, these are thousands of people who are in such a desperate position that they're forced to sleep on the streets, in bus shelters, in doorways. That's a desperate and dangerous position to be in. And the reason we're here is threefold. Firstly, not enough investment in housing that people can really afford. We hear the phrases like affordable housing, but houses that people can really afford. There have been cuts in benefits and the way in which benefits have been managed through sanctions and so on. And also cuts to homelessness services and services for people who are at risk of homelessness, people escaping domestic violence, people with mental health issues and so on. That's why we're here.
Andy Burnham, let me turn to you. You want to be the next mayor of Manchester. Are you going to find homes for all these people who are sleeping rough at the moment?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, sorry?
Will you find homes? Will you make sure that homes are built for all those people who are currently having to sleep on the streets?
Well, that's a difficult commitment to make right here and right now. I do want to solve the housing crisis in Greater Manchester and build more affordable homes, more council homes. But the commitment I can make to you this evening is that if I am elected, I have committed already to eradicate rough sleeping in the city region by 2020. In this day and age, it's not inevitable that people have to spend a night on the streets. It's a consequence of political choices. I would say the cuts that we've seen to mental health, to drug and alcohol services, to social care, those cuts have torn a hole in the safety net that used to be underneath every community. And now, sadly, many people are falling through that net and ending up on the streets. And I can confirm to you tonight from Manchester, it is cold out here tonight. And my heart goes out to anybody who is spending the night on these streets.
But there are 10 councils, 10 boroughs in Manchester who've all decided to go for a major housing plan, a major commitment of 225,000 new homes by 2035. This involves building on greenfield sites. You have opposed building on greenfield sites. Why is that?
Because I don't believe if you go straight to those big sites next to the main roads, that those proposals will build the homes that people need. They're about big homes for people with 2 cars and double garages. You know, what we need is more affordable housing, a mix of housing, so that we can really give people an affordable home, either to rent or to own. The Westminster approach for too long has all been about promoting owner occupation.
But that's not...
We need to start building more council housing, more affordable housing.
But that's not what the councils have said. They want those greenfield sites because they need the space, even for houses that are not mansions with you know, 2-car garages. They need the space. And you have said that you don't want that space to be used. Is that because you're frightened of losing voters? That there are middle-class voters there who will say, we don't want any building on greenfield sites, we want them out of here, just the brownfield sites?
No, I haven't said that, to be honest. What I've said is the plan that's been put forward needs to be rewritten, because there's too much focus on the green sites that are very attractive to developers that produce those high-value homes, and not enough focus on building higher density housing in our existing town centres. It's all a question of balance. I'm not against development where it's appropriate, but I do want to see a plan here in Greater Manchester that over the 20-year period tackles our housing crisis. Westminster has given Greater Manchester a housing crisis. The plan we've seen so far doesn't solve it, and I want a plan that does.
Okay.
So we need a better mix of housing, and crucially, more council housing, more social housing, and better regulation of the private rented sector.
We've run out of time. Andy Burnham, John Sparks, thank you very much indeed. John.
Some late news. In the last few minutes, it's been announced that the American actress Mary Tyler Moore has died at the age of 80. The Emmy Award-winning star was best known for her roles on The Dick Van Dyke Show and playing a single career woman in the Mary Tyler Moore Show in the 1970s. A representative said her husband and friends were at her bedside when she died. Tonight's main news, President Trump has moved swiftly to crack down on immigration policies, signing an executive order to begin construction of a wall along the Mexican border, declaring Mexico will pay the full cost. And that's all from us tonight. Until tomorrow, that's Channel 4 News. Good evening.
Good evening.